Well, y'all, it is election day. I'm not going to spend too long talking about elections themselves, obviously, as it is election day, and most of you, well, some of you, a good chunk of you listen to it today, but a lot of you will listen to this episode either tomorrow or the day after. I want to make sure that the information I'm giving out is a little more topical than just talking about necessarily elections themselves when you're sitting there already knowing how they turned out. So there's a few topics I do want to cover today, though, that are worth mentioning. First and foremost, Bashir issued an interesting proclamation. He says he's activated the Emergency Response Center on Election Day to deal with potential issues. And it makes you wonder, what is he talking about? Because when you look at whose role it is in order to enforce election laws, you see that it is the Attorney General. In fact, the governor has next to nothing to do with elections. The local sheriffs enforce election laws locally. The Attorney General's office does it statewide. The Secretary of State administers the elections statewide, and the county clerks administer the elections countywide. Nowhere in there was the governor's role brought up because the governor doesn't have a role in elections typically. Despite this, Bashir can't let an important day go by without him, getting a chance to go ahead and get his name in edgewise. So he's decided he's going to go ahead and activate this emergency center. And, the only reason I could come to that he's decided this is something he has to do is either A, he believes there's going to be mass riots on election day itself. And while maybe you need to be ready for something in perhaps Louisville, maybe on the high side. But I mean, really the whole, unless Trump wins in a landslide, okay, and it's discovered early on in election day that Trump wins in a landslide, you're not going to have riots in Louisville. You shouldn't, at least. I mean, I guess you could, but it seems highly unlikely. So I have to come to the conclusion that Bashir has decided to activate his emergency response because he's decided that the Attorney General, Russell Coleman, is unable himself to enforce election laws, which does actually line up. I mean, when you consider the fact that we have another school now out of elementary school, taxpayer school coming out, breaking the law, another one. For those of you keeping track now, we've talked about this like 10 times, but coming out of, let's see here. This was posted by Corey DeAngelis, Ashland Elementary Schools, Oakview Elementary School out of Ashland, Kentucky. Sorry. They posted a vote no on Amendment 2, with Ashland Independent Schools also posting a vote no on 2 post. And where's Attorney General Russell Coleman? Is he sharpening up the old pencil to write another strongly worded letter to scare them away? It's going to be really telling if after Election Day, if Amendment 2 passes, right? If somehow it passes, okay? And I say somehow because honestly, the signs don't look good to make sure it passes. I said I didn't want to talk too much about election results. As I'm recording this, what ended up happening. I mean, it wasn't really too much of a dirty secret that the establishment Republicans do not want Amendment 2 to pass. That's not really, like I said, it's not a secret, right? I mean, frankly, when they look at who's taking on their, who's taking down their favorite incumbents in the legislature, they see that the PACs, a lot of these PACs, one of their issues that they really push on is school choice. And so by passing the amendment, it goes ahead and gives even more, fuel, gives more money, gives more opportunity to those school choice PACs to get more legislation passed and to work in the primaries to get more people who agree with their legislation. And so often the people who agree with their legislation are not the favorites, or people who disagree with it happen to also be the favorites of the establishment because, they're being run by money, and most of the money you're going to bring in here in Kentucky, and we've seen this in the primaries, if you want real big money, not $50K here or something like that, but like hundreds of thousands of dollars, we see you got to get it either from the horse tracks or the teachers unions. And if you feel like you really need the money, you better get it from both. And that's who our main donor base is here in Kentucky. That's who dumps the most amount of money. Those who make money off gambling, those who make money off of the government. And so they have a vested interest because particularly they don't care. I mean, they don't really care about the educational outcomes of kids per se. The legislators don't, Democrat or Republican. We know the Democrats don't care because if they did, they would look at things like less than 20% of Kentucky high school students being proficient in, or 25%, sorry, being proficient in like math or reading and say, you know what, maybe this isn't working for us. You know, we've got entire schools where it's below double digits that a kid is proficient in math or reading. That is not by accident. That's by design, I feel. I feel like they're trying to make us stupid and lazy and unable to provide for ourselves. And the best way to do that is well, if you can't read or do math, then we don't have to hide as much from you. Just frankly, a little bit of my belief. I mean, at this point, I have to believe it's got to be some sort of conspiracy. Just because it's so blatantly obvious that these schools aren't working, but yet what do? They sit there, they ring more cowbell. I mean, I pointed this out on my social media the other day that you have the Vote No on 2 crowd running ads and running a talking point that if you vote yes on 2 and money gets diverted over to private schools, your public schools for some reason will have to raise your taxes, even though they've lost students and they actually have more funding per student without raising your taxes. Somehow they're going to have to raise your taxes locally to make up the difference. And then those same people that are arguing, well, you don't want to vote yes on 2 because it'll raise your taxes, will turn around and say, well, okay, what do you want to do to fix our schools? So you say that, hey, you can't vote yes on 2. It'll hurt all this. But, you know, our schools are crap, for lack of a better term. Our public schools are absolutely horrendous. What do you want to do to fix it? And their response is, well, you could give us more money. Well, where do you think that more money comes from? It would necessitate a tax increase. I mean, already almost half of our general fund goes to K through 12 education here in the state. So the same people that are telling you to vote no on 2 because it'll raise taxes are simultaneously advocating for viewpoints that will raise your taxes. And that's because they don't really have a good argument. The school systems are failing. We need something else. But if it fails, it's going to be because this amendment was attacked on both sides. It was attacked by the left for, not taking away control from the government. While at the same time, you got people on the right attacking it because they think you're somehow giving control to the government. I was listening to the Elon Musk, Joe Rogan episode last night. And Elon Musk made a very important point that I think some of you conservatives, quote unquote conservatives, some of you people need to understand. And that is simply put, that the government doesn't need an excuse. They're not waiting for you to open the door up for them to start regulating something. They will regulate something if they want to regulate it. If they want to come down on you, they will figure out a way to do it. They're not waiting for you to take their money through school choice, and then they'll start telling the homeschools what to do. No, they will do it regardless. And your only defense against it is to have the masses of people with you. But go ahead and push more people out of private schooling. Go ahead and push people out of doing homeschooling because they can't afford it. They can't make it work. They don't have a way to make it work financially. Push them out of it so that way when the government does come to go ahead and regulate those options, there's even less of you to fight against them. That's smart. That's a good call. I agree. That's what conservatives should be doing. And think about that simultaneously. They're somehow claiming that putting more money back in the pockets of the taxpayers to do with as they see fit is a bad idea. Taking money out of government control and giving it to the taxpayer. They're like, that's a bad idea. I mean, come on. So, we've talked a lot about Amendment 2. We'll move on from that. But what we are seeing, and this messaging too we've seen around this election time. And I think this is why it's incredibly important that today we see, like I said, I don't know what happens, and I don't know when you're listening to this, but I think if Kamala Harris wins, the politics of division on gender, on sex specifically, but gender, will be cemented into our politics for the next decade or so. And what I mean by that, rewind to Obama. So the Democrats were using race relations and division based upon racial lines in order to get Obama elected and reelected. This is factual. And what ended up happening is they were using that division in order to gain power, is that the race relations between the two went downhill. And what we're seeing in this campaign, we do see some of those race relation calls, don't get me wrong, but what we see a lot of is actually the gender case, where we see Democrats actively trying to convince conservative women that they're only voting for Donald Trump because their husbands have somehow beat them into it, that they're afraid of their husbands finding out who they really support. Now, forget the fact that that's devoid from reality, because I'll tell you, as a grassroots individual who's active there, when I go to the groups, so I'm talking about Northern Kentucky Tea Party, I'm talking about Louisville Tea Party, I'm talking about MAFA, Make America Free Again, that's MAFA for you there, or Kentucky Stands Up, or Warren County Conservatives, or geez, you listed off, the most active grassroots Republican groups in the state. The women's groups in a lot of counties, the women's Republicans groups, is more active than the parties are in a lot of these individual counties and areas as well. And all these grassroots groups I'm naming off are run by women. Their main points of contact, women. Their main person, the president of them, whatever you want to call it, women. It's largely women led. And I think that's something Democrats don't realize. In fact, as I sit here, if I'm thinking to myself about who do I need to call to get influence multipliers, let's say in the state. So if you're worried about getting grassroots support, you're worried about who do I reach out to if I'm a candidate, who do I reach out to in order to get people knocking on doors for me, making phone calls for me? How do I get that kind of support driven up? I actually I can't think of a single guy, man, you would call. Everyone that comes to mind for me is a woman. The other day, somebody called me, asked me about some candidates in a certain area who to vote for. And all the people I could think of to call and ask, like, hey, what's going on with these races, was women. And I don't think that's necessarily by accident per se. I think that women are highly organized and involved, and it makes sense that they run a lot of organizations. It's funny, they're talking about early voting, how women are 10 points higher than men in early voting, and how somehow that indicates something. And it's like we all forgot that there is a difference between the sexes, and men don't typically plan ahead. I know I haven't voted yet as I'm recording this. I'm going to go vote here soon, but men don't typically plan ahead. So it's not that surprising. I don't know why nobody said it yet, but it seems pretty obvious to me. But regardless of that, what I do find interesting is that the Democrats they'll turn around and claim that, men are running everything. And I think it's because it's unfathomable to them that, one, women actually do love their husbands, that a woman would be with a conservative man because she likes that. She likes a man who, can take control, is somewhat able to shoulder a lot of the responsibilities and stresses of things like the finances and other issues that go on within a family. Maybe they like the more traditional gender roles that come with sometimes being conservative man. I mean, it's not necessarily the case that you have to be. Or they can't fathom the idea that not all conservative people, it's not like conservative men are locking their wives up, keeping them barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. That's not accurate at all. Most men who you'd call conservative, generally they're blue-collar workers, not always, but they're blue-collar workers. They go out and they just work hard. And working hard and working hard to provide for your family and feeling that sense of responsibility to provide for your family naturally leads people to be conservative. Because think about the ethos, think about the viewpoint and the government philosophy here, right? Democrats are all about the social safety net. They're all about, the higher taxes side of things. That if you're not doing well, it's because you're some sort of victim, yada, yada, yada. Republicans, on the other hand, are all about, or supposedly their rhetoric, I mean, obviously action's a little bit different than what they actually do, is about, hey, we need to put more money back in your pocket. You need more control of your life. You can provide for yourself. Government just needs to get out of your way. And that's something the blue-collar worker resonates to because they're not asking for handouts. They take pride. Actually, not just blue-collar workers, but conservative men are the types that take pride in being able to provide for themselves, for their family. They don't want somebody else to do it. They don't want to scheme and steal or anything else to get it done. They just want to be able to provide for their families and be able to be proud of what they've done. They've lived a good life that they can look back on and say, look, maybe I didn't have a lot of money or maybe I wasn't super glamorous, but I provide for my family. I raised good kids that aren't in jail, that turned out to be good kids. I had the love of a wonderful woman. I mean, those are the things. And then the women who marry those kinds of men are the same. They're looking for the same thing. They're looking for good, honest, hardworking men. And that naturally gets associated with conservative. But you see, the problem is that the Democrats, they can't fathom it. It's impossible for them to understand how somebody else thinks differently than them. And I think this is a real thing Democrats have a problem with. So my concern is that if Kamala Harris does win, that this politics of gender will come even more into play. We've seen how already we've become so divided on race. Now if we become so incredibly divided on gender, just literally we're like teaching women to hate men, just hate them because, that's what works for Democrats to grab power. Well, that now becomes another point of division. And the more we divide based upon immutable characteristics like your gender, what you're born as, not talking about what you identify as, because that's all BS, but what you're born as and your skin color, trying to get us to hate each other over things we have no control over. We were just born into that gender. We were born into that race. Then that's how you drive that division. And I think that's certainly one of the tools in the tool belt. I know that went off kind of rambling as far as that goes. We've also got a viral video coming out on Twitter. A lot of you saw it, dealing with Kentucky, where they were voting on a electronic machine and they were trying to click Trump, wouldn't work. And then eventually they clicked Trump and it picked Kamala Harris on the ballot. And so that went pretty viral. A lot of people talking about it. John Hodgson, Representative Hodgson, said he looked into it, put out the reasoning behind it. And then, of course, our Secretary of State had to come along and yell at everybody for getting their information off Twitter, even though they were right. What happened here with this video, keep in mind we do not have electronic voting machines here in Kentucky. What you're seeing there was a disability machine. So if you have a disability and you struggle to fill out the paper, you can use this machine to fill out the paper for you, and then it prints the paper. And then you would take that paper over to submit your ballot. Simple, straightforward stuff. So what was happening there, though, you would have a chance to check it and everything else. But regardless, what was happening is according to John Hodgson and Laurel County, as they looked at it, was the person was clicking the box next to Trump's name. And that was not, like, the edges are not super sensitive in the box because he's at the top of the ballot. Was not super sensitive. You need to click, like, the middle of his name. And it wasn't, and John Hodgson brought up the ergonomics of it. So when I talk about ergonomics, a lot of people are thinking of like a chair that's designed to fit your back better, but deals with more than just, a chair fitting your back. Well, it also deals with things being naturally fitted to normal human behavior. For an example, when you walk up to a door and it's a push, but they put a pull bar on it, a bar that you would typically, your natural inclination is to grab it, like a C bar. That's just like a bar you could grab a hold of. Your natural inclination is to grab it and pull it because that's what you do with that bar. That's like your mindset. So like, for an example, if you say push and a lot of people are pulling on a door without reading the push thing, they're not idiots. It's that their body's just naturally responding to the type of fixture that's on the door compared to if you put, a lot of times when you walk up to a push door, they'll just have like a flat, piece of metal coming off. And then you naturally now push that because that is what you're drawn to do. Oh, that's a surface I push versus a surface I pull. And so what Hodgson's talking about here is that they have that box next to Trump's name on the voting machine there, which makes you think that's where you would click, but you actually need to click at the center, which is a design flaw, obviously. But that doesn't change the fact that it is a problem. And it also doesn't change the fact that we've seen other issues, not just in Kentucky, but across the country. When it comes to some of these voting machines, widely voting issues, we had the issue out of Butler, Pennsylvania, where they were closing early voting too early. And so that caused the Trump campaign had to go to court and get that dealt with because, they weren't supposed to shut down the lines until like 5:30, 6. They're shutting them down at 1:30, 2:30 because they were too long. And so they threw a fit about that. The Republicans didn't throw a fit. They went to court to get that fixed. But the Democrats threw a fit about like, oh, well, you can go to court. This ain't a big deal. It's just a really long line. Everything else. And so the point is that, and then here in Kentucky, had another issue too that I saw where people are getting their ballots with already like some marks in the Kamala Harris voting block. And that is of concern. If you get a ballot that has some marks already in the box, it could invalidate your other vote because if you're looked at and the machine says, oh, okay, you voted in the same race twice and you weren't supposed to, it'll just invalidate both responses. So a little bit of a mark in a box could throw it off. I think it probably has to be a bigger mark than what I was seeing, but that is of a real concern, something to be on the lookout for. But it always seems to be that these issues, these concerns with the equipment, with the ballots, with closing early, it always seems to be something that affects Republicans and not Democrats. And that is worth, I think, mentioning. I personally haven't seen anything that would really affect Democrats heavily, but I've seen plenty of things that affect Republicans. And so wrapping back around to our illustrious Secretary of State, Michael Adams, he got all upset that people are getting their information off Twitter of the video not working and said it was misinformation, disinformation. Y'all need to stop going to Twitter and blah, blah, blah. Well, first, if it wasn't for Twitter sharing the video, nobody would have any questions about it in the first place, would they? There'd be nothing to fix. Get your news off Twitter. Now, it does turn out the machine was flawed. And because of the response off Twitter, the machine was removed from service. And now moving forward, because of this Twitter response, now the design on these will probably be a little bit different to make sure that people understand where to press and where not to press. That's a difference made because of Twitter. It's so funny to me. You hear these especially elected people all the time talk about how mean and awful Twitter is, that people go to Twitter and they talk about these things and people just don't understand and blah, 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 blah. But yet so often when we see these things, I mean, they admitted the machine was not operating correctly. It needed to be fixed. Period. And so often when we hear them complaining, especially elected people, complaining about things like Twitter and the information being pushed around on it, what we find out is that they wouldn't have addressed any of this had Twitter not come about to deal with it. And they lament it. They don't want to work, and that's truthfully it. They just don't want to work. I do want to point to so far early voting has pointed to a higher Republican turnout than Democrat across the state. This is good news for some of the down ballot Republicans. I talked about the fact that, there was he said this on Red, White, and Blue, and he also said this in an article about the House District 45 race. I believe it was Senator Reggie Thomas. That's who it was. Senator Reggie Thomas said this, and in articles he said this in Red, White, and Blue on local media there, that Democrats were real excited to turn out and vote for Harris. Excitement's all-time high. That Democrats will really do much better than Republicans in a lot of ways because of turnout, because they're really excited. His exact quote here is this. He says, Thomas also thinks the presidential race, with Democrats more energized around Vice President Kamala Harris' campaign than they were President Joe Biden's reelection, will help Democrats in Lexington. I said, obviously, that's not true. Republican excitement is going to be higher in Kentucky just naturally because it's a red state. Your guy is going to win. This state, who you go vote for, is going to win. Democrats, it's kind of like, well, we know Trump's going to win. He wins by huge margins. Why turn out to vote? But doesn't stop the old senator from peddling that out there all over different media sources. And I just think he's wrong. I think they're living in fantasy land. I think a lot of these Democrats in Kentucky are living in a fantasy land about what the outcome of these elections will be. I talked once again, I think the midterms here, they should hope that Trump wins, that Republicans get control of the Senate, Republicans maintain control of the House. And so that way, come midterms, they can pick up a few seats maybe if we have low Republican turnout, high Democrat turnout. Maybe that gives them more opportunity. We'll see. Well, y'all, that's all I got time for today on Election Day. Please get out there, go vote. Today's show, quick, simple, easy. The next show will be probably Wednesday, tomorrow. But y'all have a great rest of your day.